Welcome everyone to the first session of Modes of Transit in the Necropastoral. This seminar is a collaborative investigation of decaying, decomposing, and/or dying nature, uncovering the subterranean precincts and possibilities of the Necropastoral. The Necropastoral designates a way of thinking about both ecology and aesthetics that eats away at categories like cause and effect, past and future, human and inhuman, living and dead. Instead, the necropastoral propagates an eco-aesthetic zone, which is decadent, inverted, unfit, and too much, posthumous and profligate, anachronistic and undermining. It expectorates an uneven array of ill-founded and spectacular effects. As we collectively transit through the necropastoral, we will read poetry in translation and consider the katabatic terrains and the ecologies they entailed. We will experience the distending and relieving shifts in pressure created by transit through genres and languages. We will encounter plural, extremophile, and hybrid life forms and subjectivities and palpate novel topographies with our increasingly acute sensory appendages. We will assimilate botanical, avian, angelic ecologies of language and consider translation's impossibility as a novel mode of posthumous survival. Our instructor today, Guggenheim Fellow Joyelle McSweeney, is the author of 10 books of poetry, drama, and prose, a well-known critic and a vital publisher of international literature in translation. McSweeney's recent book, Toxicon and Arachne, by Nightboat Books, was called Frightening and Brilliant in the New Yorker and earned her the Shelley Memorial Prize from the Poetry Society of America. Her 2014 essay collection, The Necropastoral Poetry, Media, Occults, is widely regarded as a visionary work of eco-criticism. Her debut poetry volume, The Red Bird, inaugurated the Fence Modern Poets series in 2001, while her verse play, Dead Youth and the Leaks inaugurated the Leslie Scalapinos Prize for Innovative Women Performance Artists in 2014. With Carmen Maria Machado, she was the guest editor of Best American Experimental Writing 2020. She also collaborated with Dawn-Mi Choi on translations of 2 short stories by Korean modernist Yi Sang, featured in Yi Sang's selected works from Wave Books, alongside translations by Jack Jung and Savakun Nakayasu. With Johannes Goransson, she co-edits the International Press Action Books, which has built readerships for a diverse array of US and international authors for Griffin Prize winners Kim Ya-soon and Dawn-Mi Choi, to Danielle Borzutsky and Raul Zurita, to Jane Wong, Destiny Hemphill, and Valerie Suing. She lives in South Bend, Indiana, and teaches at Notre Dame. Over to you, Joyelle.
Hello, everybody. And let me just, before I get too into this, get my slides ready for you. So just a second. Okay, they are loading. And here we are. All right. Well, it's wonderful to be all together here in this virtual space. And I am so grateful to the staff at the New Center for everything they've done to get us to today and everything they're going to do to make sure that our next 4 course meetings are really exciting and pliant, and that folks' voices and ideas are very present in our sessions, because that's very important to me. So I want to welcome you to Modes of Transit in the Necropastoral. And it's really fitting that we're all connecting from different places with different languages at our disposal, from different time zones, and we are connecting from different disciplines and areas of expertise. Because we are immediately forming the kind of zone of exchange that I wanted to name with this neologism, the Necropastoral. a place where hierarchies are largely broken down and zones of exchange are created, and unexpected and occult contacts and productivities can happen, flare up, subside, some lasting, some running off to other places, and really briefly coming into uncertain and brief-lived simultaneity before we split again into our occulted zones. So we are already doing it. We are already forming this necropastoral. And another signature mode of the necropastoral is the strange meeting. So that's kind of like I appropriated that term from the poetry of Wilfred Owen to name this kind of unexpected, whether it's anachronistic or transhistorical or transnational, translingual, transdisciplinary, kind of like fusing and splitting that releases the energy of the necropastoral. So we're already doing it. Case closed. Okay. So the plan for today is I want to talk just a little bit here at the beginning about how I came to this, the necropastoral as a term and what happened next. I'm going to show you a little presentation. After we go over some of the basic terms of the necropastoral, I'm going to show you a little presentation, just 10 minutes, that I made. And after which I'd love to hear your thoughts about what elements of the necropastoral are starting to come into focus for you. And then we'll start going over some of the reading. And I am a big believer in taking a break halfway. So we'll take a break halfway between discussions of the readings. And then the last portion of class, there's going to be a writing prompt to sort of start stepping you into this kind of neologistic and very aestheticized way of developing descriptions of the world as you wish to describe it. We'll do the first few steps in class, and then I'll give you either in class or through the Google Classroom the rest of the steps to do at home before the next session. And then folks who wish to share what they've written, that will form the basis of the presentations for next week. So you can do that sign up with the staff. I hope that makes sense. So that's the roadmap. Little conversation about the necropastoral, discussing the reading, taking a break, discussing the second reading, and then finishing up class with a writing prompt. Which has a lot of steps, so get ready. Does that sound okay? Have some protein during the break. Okay, so let's get into it then with the necropastoral. So I arrived at the necropastoral more than 10 years ago now, which is outrageous to think about. And two things I'll say about it before I get into like what it is, or maybe three things. The first thing it is a neologism, right? Like a made up word. And I kind of took the hit, I got a hit off the neologism of Achille Mbembe's necropolitics and the model there of just taking like the Foucauldian model of biopolitics, inverting it by replacing bio with necro, and seeing what you have learned about the world as you wish to describe it from that neologism. So from that permission of like a neologism that becomes instructive or even forensic, I decided to configure this neologism, necropastoral. And to step back one step from that, this was about 10 years ago when there were starting to be anthologies of ecopoetics and poetry that might have an ecological theme and so forth, and even just pastoral poetry, and people were calling it things like new pastoral or whatever it might be. And it just didn't sit that well with me. For one thing, a really important event in my life had been living in the American Gulf Coast during Hurricane Katrina. And not only was the level of loss and decades-long loss and that generated from Hurricane Katrina like a massive thing to witness, but because I lived a few hours away, I lived in Alabama, so a few hours away from where the storm hit and the levees broke, I was able to see there that the response to Hurricane Katrina was very militarized. It was carceral in the sense that a big emphasis was put on sending these military convoys in and taking prisoners away or moving them or whatever it may be. So there was this kind of carceral military response. And finally, it was extractive because as public like the school system collapsed and, as people were finally evacuated and those public services were never restored, they were replaced, they were privatized. So that quadruple experience, I guess, about the loss of life, of course, but also the militarized, the carceral, and the capitalistic response to the hurricane really made the scales fall from my eyes and made me realize that there is really no such thing as a natural disaster, that disasters are in their impact, if not their causation, man-made. And so, or man exacerbated, I suppose you could see. This was me, my crash course in the Anthropocene, you might also say. So my politics and my aesthetics like collapsed into each other. I was 25, I suppose. So my politics and my aesthetics really collapsed into each other at that point. And then I took this job up here. I left Alabama and took this job here in Indiana, which is a Rust Belt, sort of like a post-industrial part of the US near the Great Lakes. So that meant I started living in a place that was defined by rust. So it's defined by a process that is about decay. We think of that in terms of decay, and adjacent to a lake, which has this huge effect on the weather, and it's very dramatic. The lake effect you may have heard of, if those of you aren't from the States may not have, but like weather events happen here that are not predicted. They just happen because of whatever the lake is up to. The lake kind of propagates its own Lake Michigan, this is. Chicago's on the other side, on the west side, and we're on the east side. And the weather, just like whatever's happening on the face of the lake, will propagate its own weather. So it's like event without cause. It's effect without cause. So this dislocation from cause and effect, but manifested by huge ecological events, spectacular events. And this experience, this kind of political and aesthetic collapse, let's say, that Katrina caused for me, together prime me to have a very different orientation towards ecopoetics than a lot of my peers at the time. It was hard for me to think like about a Gaia model or a return to pristine nature model or any of those models, because it seemed to me that like what we think of as ecological is happening all around us all the time. It's active, it's poisoned, it's contaminated, it's harmful, it's surprising, it's eventful, and it's kind of it's decadent in the sense that its effects are going towards decay and breakdown, but that also to add like a surrealist, or to go back to neologism, that by turning our attention to that, we find zones of activity and possibility and invention and newness and power that may not be named by more kind of progressive or ways of talking about nature, or like restorative or even solutionist ways of talking about nature, that in fact, looking at ecopoetics from the position of catastrophe, or from the position of rust, from the position of mutation, contamination, hybridity, all these things, and even like calamitous and spectacular events, like the lake effect, that doesn't exactly have causes, or doesn't have the same kind of causes that we think of weather happening elsewhere. This all sheds whole new models of worlding, I guess you could say, thinking about the world. So therefore, when this ecopoetics kind of energy picked up 10, 15 years ago in America, it set something off in me, a desire to kind of rename, a desire to kind of invert the models that were being presented. And therefore, being a surrealist, I decided that I would invert the term, take this word pastoral with its kind of retrograde energy, or its conservatism, or its idea that there might be something pristine in nature, and kind of contaminate it with this word necro, and let it go to work and see. And so the word, I came up with the word first, and then I began to describe the principles that I felt were being generated by this word. And soon I came to a description of like all of literature and the world itself, which we'll get into today. But before I get into any of that, the specifics of the Necropastoral, I was wondering if folks, because I know we're all coming from a lot of different disciplines and a lot of reasons for being interested. So I was wondering if the spirit moves you in some Quaker sense, if people could talk a little bit about, first of all, what this word necropastoral, just at first sight, seems to generate for you in your mind, since it is a neologism. And I think one thing we can say about neologism is like the components are always very active in some way. So I'm just wondering, for folks who wish to share at a glance, or like at first meeting, at strange meeting with this term, what the term necropastoral stirs for you, and how you think the components are working either together or against each other.
I think, can I go? I think I'm Michelle, or Shelley. I think that pastoral is like a systems approach to something. So when it talks about like necropastoral, to me, it brings up like the decay of a system, not necessarily the decay of an individualistic way of thinking about it. And then it also brings up a lot of when you're talking about the flood, about like Lacey M. Johnson's work with ecofeminism and the decay of kind of like how all violence is a system. And so like decay is also its own like energetic system or whatever. Yeah.
Love that. Love that. Energetic system. Love it. Okay. Anybody else?
Arnav, would you like to?
Uh, I'm Arnav from India, and necropastoral, the neologism necropastoral. What struck me was the association of pastoral with of pastoral with its traditional Renaissance characteristics, and its origins in Greco-Roman poetry. What struck me specifically was that the pastoral was associated with Arcadia, and there was this, like, after the Black Plague in across Europe, a prominent aspect of the of Arcadia was that that in Arcadia ego, that is death is also there in Arcadia. So the association of an Edenic realm of the pastoral, not necessarily from a Greco-Roman viewpoint, but from a biblical one, an Edenic realm like Arcadia that can be invaded by anytime by the contingencies of death and sin and death, and can be contaminated by it. That struck me first.
For sure. I totally hear what you're saying. And for me, that's so interesting because it shows also that this like kind of aesthetic slogan, et in Arcadia ego, from those representations of Arcadia that pick up in Western culture, itself has force and sticking power. Itself has something to say to us. It's a little aesthetic tag that sticks around and exerts itself anachronistically, right? So that's so interesting to me that you would flag that. And yeah, like we think of, well, I'm about to read a little passage that really goes to what you're saying, but I think that's so interesting. And also, if it's already like the snake in the garden, like death is even in Arcadia, the necropastoral in some ways is a bit of a contradiction, right? Because it attaches this word necro to the pastoral, but the pastoral already had that. It almost was, the pastoral is already like nervous about the necrotizing energies that might touch on it, right? And it is maybe an anxietous response to threat, is to like set up a pastoral and say, you know, but somewhere there's an Arcadia, or outside the city there's an Arcadia, but already we know that death is in residency in Arcadia. So in some ways you could say this is just like an intensifying of the anxiety that's already part of pastoralism, and kind of using it to kind of shake it apart and see what falls out and what emerges. Looks like Isabella or Rebecca, sorry.
Hey there. Absolutely. Everything everyone's saying. And also when I encountered this term actually from one of my instructors in my MFA program, and lit up because I was like, oh my God, there's a word for this space that I'm writing in. I come from a agricultural background. I was a huge lover of the Mary Olivers and Wendell-Berrys of the world for a long time. And then so got into sustainable agriculture and organic farming for about 10 years, and realized that the Arcadia is fucked.
and I was dealing with death I was raising livestock and dealing with death every single day. I also like do birth work, and that is also, you know, dealing with death every single day. And it seemed to me that the more intimacy I cultivated with these natural systems, the more presence death had. And I grew really alarmed at how little people understood that, how little people regarded that, and have devoted my work now to elevating that narrative and that piece of the puzzle. So when I heard this term, I was like, okay, there's people thinking about this. And I'm not alone in my experience of the world and in my view of the world and in the desire to have this conversation.
So I love how you phrased that, your sense of alarm, because another thing that it brings up for me is that I've used the word anxiety. For me personally, this may not be true for everyone. It reduces some of the anxiety to just invite death into the conversation, like, and to see what we see when we don't try to hold it away. Like, it's actually less stressful for me as a thinker, and it makes my brain kind of a little more juicy and makes me, you know, feel that there's work to be done. So I appreciate how you've conveyed it. And the other thing that I would jump off what you said is just, myself coming from like a real affinity with surrealism and early avant-gardes and decadence, we can read these texts against, those groups give us the tool of reading against the grain, right? And so even Necropastoral, like, we don't need to throw out our classicism. We just like reapproach it and read against the grain for what was already there, or for what might be pulled out of it when we invert some of our ideals. And when we choose to elevate what has formerly been perjurated, what do we discover? So yeah, thank you very much for sharing that. And maybe just one more before we look at some stuff. So is it Isabella? Yeah. You're muted, my friend.
Oops, sorry.
There-
So hey, for me it's a very interesting term because it joins two things that in a first glance they kind of go against one another. Because for me the pastoral makes me think of beings enrobed with light and you know, Millet realism, and you know, all these maintenance of organic systems, and kind of a more a traditionalist view. Maybe that's, I mean, mostly in my head, but then the necro is always a part of that. Also, I've also lived in the countryside, and just death and gore is it's a daily practice, right? So just understanding this unraveling in togetherness, so putting them together, it feels like a natural growth. And the other thing that I had on my mind is that some years ago, I was in Belgium in a residency. We went into a forest, and in this forest was a very interesting system that they had for each tree. The main was called Bokrish. And there was this guy and this team that they took care of each trees, and each trees they were present on a database. And for the trees, for each tree they had this classification, right? So they had a classification, and I have a text about this with some friends that I can share. And so for each tree, you had the award for their state, right? And the last state that the tree could be assigned was an indistinguishable mass. Right, so I think it really ties back to the necropastoral, because it's this constant transformation. Yeah, that's what I wanted to say.
That's fabulous. And one thing I would pull out from what you said also is that yes, two things. One is this notion that we have put necro and pastoral next to each other, and they start working on each other. I mean, I think this to step away from our topic and into our meta topic, the neologism itself has that kind of embedded in it, right? And that the idea is you create a word, and then the portions of the word you've created start immediately forming this kind of dyad, this kind of cell, which is active and unpredictable, and that generates energy in the minds of those who encounter it. And the necropastoral as a zone is like this too, because one of the things, and here's a little cheat code for me, is I, kind of invented this word and kind of set it in motion, but when it touches folks who are thinking about it from all different angles and disciplines, people can like kind of cast off what they're not interested in and take what they're interested in and keep the zone going and keep it fertile and interesting. It doesn't all have to be described by me. I don't taxonomize the whole thing. I'm not responsible for like knowing everything about it. In fact, I don't want to. It's almost like this kind of neologistic energy of just like putting something together and letting it start to generate this energy, and then letting people take that energy as it hits them to where they need to take it, is one of the possibilities of the necropastoral, but more broadly of kind of neologistic interventions themselves. So since I know you guys are all thinkers and makers, like I wanted to just like bracket that as like even more important than the topic at hand, is this notion that like the neologistic intervention in your field or across fields is itself powerful and interesting and worth doing. A magic word, maybe. Okay, Georgiana, why don't you have the last word on the necropastoral, and then we'll go into some examples.
Oh, thank you. I wanted to add that so I'm Georgiana, I'm from Romania, I live in Berlin. That in Romania, pastoral is almost like a genre. So at first I thought it's like necropastoral would be a subgenre of sorts that incorporated all the methods that you were, or like the I don't know, this kind of exhilarating terms you alluded to in the presentation of the seminar. And one of the most well-known Romanian pastoral is actually our national founding myth, which is about this prophet sheep who warns her shepherd that his fellow shepherds are going to kill him. And instead of running away, he tells her, well, if someone asks around, or like my mom, just tell her that I married the stars. And so he looks at his death as a wedding, and basically tells the sheep to tell on the story, not of his murder and annihilation, but of his transformation and communing again with the stars. And it's like this beautiful cosmic wedding going on. So yeah.
So thank you for sharing that. And also to pick up on a few things you said. Well, one is like exhilarating. So for me, and I guess for people here you wouldn't have joined, the idea of necropastoral is exhilarating in the sense that it releases a kind of intense intellectual or emotional energy, right? That seems to like change the fabric around it. So it's important to note that neologisms also like generate these affects, like pulses of energy, synaptic, neurological, whatever word you would want to use. And the other one is that, this idea that there's something foundational, like these foundational myths, like you're talking about. We think of the pastoral and the classical heritage of Western culture, at least as it has been exported through empire, as carrying these like pastoral kernels, and the idea that you can kind of like pull that into the present tense, that you can make it touch contemporary contaminants. You can see, like, even in the image that we're looking at here. So this is a still from Jack Smith's Normal Love, which I really suggest you check out. And it has all these classical tableaus or near classical tableaus. This is a nymph. This is so Jack Smith was a downtown filmmaker in the 60s and 70s and 50s, actually. for several decades in New York City, like a contemporary of Warhol, but very down, like kind of a Warhol inversion, in the sense that it stayed down, way down, and all the performers were either drug addicts or sex workers or other folks that have not been given like high prestige in the culture, were turned into the performers of these myths. These kind of cinematic myths. And this one is like a classic, like there's a nymph and a satyr comes, etc. So this is called Normal Love. You can look at it on
Thank you.
you can look at it on YouTube. And the colors are gorgeous, right? But it's already like very synthetic and very, this particular nymph is a performer called Mario Montez, who identified as a transvestite, and you can see a very red contemporary red lipstick. So it's already, there's petroleum in that lipstick. It's already contaminating our myth. So this idea of taking the foundational and making kind of anachronistic interventions in it and then seeing what comes out of that kind of unholy marriage is definitely one of the things we can do with the necropastoral, but also something you can do with neologism itself. Okay, so moving into the next part of the conversation then, I just wanted to like read the first page, literally. So I wrote this book. Let's see if I can get it to show up on the stage. We can't. There it is. Joyelle McSweeney, the Necropastoral. This is what it looked like. You can't really see it because I've created all this like weird stuff on my Zoom screen. There it is. You can see me, my little picture. I was identifying sort of as a boy then. But, you know, we have to put our youth away. So these are the first two paragraphs of the book, and I just wanted to put them here. And it actually covers a lot of the stuff we just talked about. So just literally reading from my own book, I give the name Necropastoral to the manifestation of the infectiousness, anxiety, and contagion occultly present in the hygienic borders of the classical pastoral. For all the pastoral shoring up of separations, and despite the cordon sanitaire it purports to erect between unhealthy urban strife and wholesome rural peace, we must remember, as our seminar mate pointed out, that the premier celebrity resident of Arcadia is death. It is into the rural that the rich urbanites flee with their plague. That's the setting for the Decameron, right? And into the urbs that rat vessels steer with their cargoes of fleas. So the term necropastoral remarks the pastoral as a zone of exchange, shading this green theme park with the suspicion that the Anthropocene epoch is in fact synonymous with ecological end times. I'll also say about the Anthropocene, I don't know if this term is getting a little shop worn. Again, this was written about a decade ago. But part of what the necropastoral can also do is remind us that these terms, be they geological or scientific, are also constantly being invented. And they also involve making neologisms out of classical languages. So like taxonomy itself is already doing very anxietous, possibly necropastoral work, and that we can take those words apart and refuse them to release new energy as we need to. Okay. This is the second paragraph on the first page, and now I'll stop. So, never inert, the necropastoral is defined by its activity, its networking, its paradoxical proliferation, its self-digestion. So this is the decay element of the necropastoral. Its eructations, its necroticness, its hunger, its hole-making, which configures a burgeoning textual tissue defined by holes. A tissue thus as absent as it is present, and therefore not absent, not present, protoplasmic, spectral. So I'll break here and say, in the last 10 years, something that I'm thinking about more and more is the posthumous. So if at the moment of the necropastoral, I was really thinking about decay and like what comes after decay, obviously, and posthumicity, and possibilities that can't be named yet by the languages that we have, but maybe can be discovered and will be discovered. And that's posthumicity for me is a very open question, and it'd be one I'd love to hear from you guys about as we continue through the subsequent weeks, especially next week, where there's this question about whether the speaker of this narrative poem is alive or dead or some other category. And it's that some other category that I'm very interested in. Whether we would call that posthumous, like we have all these terms now, like dead, undead, posthumous, unalive, or like having an uncanny vitality, ghost-like, haunting, like all these different, thank you, yes, I see liminal pop up, liminal. And we know that like viruses, extremophiles, like there are organisms, if we call them that, or beings, if that's not quite right. I'm sure people in this chat have ideas about that. which live those modalities, if exist in those modalities, if not live. Like there's also exist, that's different. So I would say that's somewhere my idea is continuing upon, and not, it is discussed in my book, The Necropastoral, but for me, it remains an open question that I'd love to hear more about if it occurs to people as we continue through meetings. Okay, so this is the last, I'll just read this last thing to you and then we'll move on. So it is in this sense that we find, okay, so now why is it political? Well, the political force of the Necropastoral is in its ability to stage networks and strange meetings and, you know, basically like find in borders, not places of separation, but places of efflorescence. So strange meetings in the Necropastoral eat away, and then this is back to sort of what it means for the discipline. It eats away at the model of literary lineage that depends on separation, hierarchy, before and after, linearity itself. Released like a rat body. I was obsessed with the plague. This was way before COVID, so like bubonic plagues were obsessing me. Released like a rat body into all edifices of hegemony, the strange meeting will emerge as one of the Necropastoral's occult political modes. I think there's more we could say about the political inferences, but we also have 4 weeks together, so we can return to it. But this is just to say that a lot of the energies that folks were associating with this neologism were definitely ones that kicked this whole like way of thinking off. And as in my book, I talk about really diverse stuff from like Wilfred Owen's, like a classic part of the English canon, contemporary English, modern English canon, Aimé Césaire, the Martinican surrealist, and then, you know, I've talked about this filmmaker, Jack Smith and Andy Warhol, Damiche, contemporary Korean poetry. Like this really gave me a permission to just like eat down all the separations that literary disciplines generally insist upon, and let works come together and split apart within the lens of the Necropastoral. So here's a contemporary, look at the date. This is, oh, sorry, I put the American style date there, but July 29th, 2024. This is the Necropastoral. So this was created by the American, well, UK and American-based, formerly UK-based critic, A.V. Maricini. I feel like I just misspelled her name, so I'll cover it with my head. It's 2 C's, but Maricini with 2 C's, not 2 N's, who is the author of a really exciting critical book called We the Parasites. And you can tell from the title how, you know, an ecological category of parasitism that is normally, you know, held down and seen as like in negative in our culture, when it's presented as a metaphor, is elevated in that work and held up and to the light to see what it can tell us about art and criticism. So I spelled it right up there, A.V. Maricini's, and she posted this on Twitter out of nowhere, and I wrote to her for permission to share it with you. So this is a strawberry necropastoral, a tribute to Eva Hesse, and who I hope most of you know is a great installation artist and sculptor of the 20th century. So please look her up. If you don't know her, you'll be amazed and delighted and sustained by what you find. So Strawberry Necropastoral, tribute to Eva Hesse. This is A.V. This is her own caption. Is made from carbon steel aquarium tubing, 3x16-inch plastic, and 1 Oishi strawberry. There's something interesting here too about Hesse's use of petroleum byproducts, the organic and anti-organic dialectic, and aspects of the Anthropocene post-industrial that you explore, you meaning me. So I was so thrilled to see this, because this kind of jumps my idea a decade along, sends it out into the world by somebody who's probably at least a decade younger than me, and sees how it works. And also another thing I would say about this, well, first of all, does anybody have a comment? I know you're just seeing this for the first time, but like how something like this could be a necropastoral? Pop quiz. It's okay, because I'll just share what I think and then we can move on. Well, what's interesting for me is something that I feel like folks already touched upon is, because of the wonders of the English language, necropastoral could be 3 things, right? It could be an adjective, like I could describe a work as being pastoral or necropastoral. It could be a noun. I could describe a work or object, in this case, as being a necropastoral. Or it could be a way of reading and thinking, like I'm making a necropastoral reading of this artwork, right? And it can be all those 3 things at once. So in this case, A.V. labels it a necropastoral, but what I think it kind of is, and she calls it a tribute to Eva Hesse, but I think it's a kind of essay. Now, I know this is, actually with this group probably won't seem crazy, but a kind of way of getting into the materials and networks that AV sees at work in that sculpting, trying them out, like instead of a close reading, we have like a kind of a sculpture, and networking it to something somewhat sublime, the sublime but strawberry that is of course also cannot live. Eva Hesse died quite young, and some think her exposure to the petroleum byproducts that she sculpted with had something to do with, unfortunately, with the cancer that she contracted, and also that her work is made of work that itself cannot survive. It's made of materials that are themselves decaying, and it calls upon curators sometimes to recreate the works or rehang them. So this element of like the sort of sublime thing that is more than posthumous and posthumously in decay are kind of networked here. Did I see a hand come up somewhere though? Somebody have something to say about this work? Or
Yeah, but you just said about,
yeah,
hi,
Rodolfo.
I'm Rodolfo. The idea that that Eva has worked with these products that were toxic and that also led her to her death. It's something that comes to my mind in this aspect. I mean, not only the materials, the use of anti-organic, I don't know how to say, these petroleum-based products in the Maracini work, but also the idea of it's a little bit like a science fiction thing. I see it like someone hanged and intubed with plastic in order to survive or something. And in this aspect, it's just like abducting the juice of the fruit of the strawberry. No, yeah, it's just yeah, but I mean, I raised my hand when in order to talk about Eva Hesse's death, and then
Yeah.
you said it. So
No,
nothing more to say.
I love the terms that you shared, and something that I would share is people are putting really awesome comments in the chat, by the way, and allusions, and that shows you how rich this extremely small. She didn't say what the scale of this work is, but I would say very small. Looking at the strawberry, this extremely small kernel of a work is like moving out, right, through all the allusions that folks are isolating. And something else I would say to you, Rodolfo, is this connection between, the life force of the strawberry that is obviously going to decay. And so this, like, what we actually has is like a circuiting of decay. And in a way, it could have some kind of allegorical rhyme with chemotherapy itself. Like, isn't there, like, there's porphyria, I'm gonna say, like, the poison of chemotherapy, some of which comes from from sources that have been in the Mediterranean for thousands of years. I can't remember. We can look it up at the break. It's porphyry something, like the most toxic chemotherapy drug is like, it comes from a Mediterranean, I think, mollusk. It is named for it as well. So there's your classicism too, and your kind of legacy of classicism running through all this. And please look at the chats for more ideas here. But it's such a striking piece of art that I feel like Maracini almost created as an etude preliminary to writing an essay, but it has like the richness of an essay, right? Okay, so that's really excellent. And I hope that this gives you folks some ideas of things that they make as a jumping off of this course, or is this like kind of neologistic way of thinking of like circuiting things together to let them act on each other so richly. She calls it a necropastoral, but it's kind of neo-structure, a neologistic structure, I think, as well. So for the next 10 minutes, I wanted to, before we go to the texts that I hope you guys, I was urged by the staff to share these texts in advance, like the idea that people might have a look at them. So for the middle part of our conversation today, I would like to look at some of those texts. But for the next little bit, let's see what time it is. What I'd like to do is show you folks some of a presentation that I made about a year ago. So this is like a presentation within a presentation. And it's just another application of the idea, this time to the idea of luciferase. So luciferase is the chemical compound in what do you call those? Suddenly I'm blanking on the term. In bioluminescent plants and animals that generate their own light. The chemical compound is called luciferase because it's light bearing, right? But of course, for those of us who have our toes dipped at all in Western literary culture and the figure of Lucifer in Paradise Lost, it's very hard to read this as only its scientific neologism and not see it as intensified by contact with literature, right? And then by contact with apocalypse and eschatology and idea of which fall is fortunate. I mean, two figures fall in Paradise Lost, right? Adam falls and Lucifer falls. Adam's fall is considered fortunate in Christological thinking because eventually it leads to the redemption. But what about Lucifer's? Is it also, it's the second fall, also fortunate? Hard to say. And finally, I'll just say that decadence, the term decadence has this Latin root of falling, cado. When you decay, you're falling apart, right? And so all of these fortunate falls are falling into decay and out of immortality. I love all these little comments that are coming through. For me, are circuited to this term luciferase. So I wrote this piece, luciferin. Now, the reason I'm playing it for you is to open up a set of ideas, but also to show you on a meta level, this way of thinking. Like I'm taking like a scientific, I'm acknowledging that science actually works logistically with neologisms as well. It's taxonomical force. I'm using it to kind of push it back on aesthetic objects and then to use the aesthetic objects to intensify the scientific model. So it's kind of like circuiting of intensities that I'm trying to mobilize in this talk. I'm showing it to you both to share the ideas, but also to share the model. Does that make sense? Okay, so let's see. At the beginning, I salute the people of Malmo. So if anyone's in Malmo right now, I salute you. Let's see if it even works. That would be kind of surprising. Is it not going to work? If it's not going to work, I can do something different. Where is it? Oh, maybe it's coming. We'll see. It seems to have stripped away my video. Okay. Well, if it's going to strip away my video, we'll just move on to something else. You'll just have to imagine. Okay, hold on just a second. We won't let it rattle us, friends. We'll just move forward. Okay, imagine, if you will, and maybe I can send the link in the Google Classroom. It should be here. It's here on my screen, on my computer, but not on this presentation. There's a really lively conversation going on in the comments. I don't really know how to like stage them, but please read them. Maybe at the break, read them. Okay, I'm gonna move on from this, but hold on to that idea I just made, please. It's not so much important that you hear my remarks on luciferin as that you think about this idea that like, we take the taxonomy of science that surrounds us and we reinfuse them. We like apply them to literature and then we apply the literature back to the science, and this system of intensities, of kind of lawless intensities, can go to work to open up new kind of vistas for thinking about all of the attached matters, including survival itself. Okay, we'll leave that there. Okay, let me see. So the next thing I'd like to do then is have a little bit of a look at this book with deer. I have kind of foiled myself with this like slideshow manoeuvres here. And I gave you an excerpt, a good excerpt of With Deer, Hos Radio in your in the Google Classroom, I believe. So first of all, are there any Swedish folks here who can read Swedish? Seems like folks are from all over.
I can read a little bit of Swedish, but I'm not Swedish.
Okay, hi Anna. Well, if you care to jump in, please. Oh wait, was it Anna who said that?
Yeah, it was me because I was studying in Sweden, so that's why I know a little bit of Swedish.
Okay, well, awesome. So if you feel like if the spirit moves you to jump in and add something as we look at this, then please do. So
I read Swedish as well. Sorry to jump in. I'm not Swedish, I'm Danish, but I study literature in Swedish and read a lot of Swedish.
Well, fantastic. Okay, so one thing I would add for Swedish readers, so the question that I'm going to put on the board here is, how can we use the Necropastoral to think about poetry and translation and vice versa? that's one thing that we can hold from the next part of the conversation, but we can also that's just what I was thinking about at home, because we've already covered a lot of interesting ground here about death, about the temporary versus the permanent, about reading precedent against the grain, and letting anachronistic examples kind of pile up, and also about like circuiting. I guess the next layer we could layer in would be looking back on the strawberry sculpture, circuiting different taxa, like a sci-fi and a pastoral, or a kind of vaguely medicalized and a herbaceous together, this kind of neologistic way of thinking, what blooms, what holy or unholy, helpful or unhelpful thing blooms, right? So for our example, I gave you guys an excerpt of this book, With Deer. It's by this poet in the middle, Osabai, who is a former Stockholm Surrealist. In her youth, she was part of their art action brigade, the Stockholm Surrealists, and now writes these really remarkable works. And it's translated by this fella covering his face. That's Johannes Janssen, who is my partner, and we publish our international press together. We publish stuff from all over the world, and the book that we're reading next week, Wild and Riverbank, a work from Japan, is one of our titles. We didn't publish this book, but obviously I don't speak Swedish, but I've thought and looked at this poet quite a bit. So let's have a look. So what I'd like to do is just look at like maybe 3 poems from this book, and then we'll have a break. So I would like to look at 3 poems of this book and sort of collectively read them together. I think a little bit about 2 things. Well, think about whatever. One is, how does this book propagate a kind of ecology? Like, what kind of ecology is this? Like, is it ecological? What do you think? What would you have to say about this environs and this biome? What do we find here? That's the first question. Is that specific enough for us to get started? Like, just like, what kind of biome, what kind of ecology is this? And what is it typified by? What are its species? What do we have to say about it? So does anybody, I think does anybody, would either of you be willing to read the Swedish? Just so we can get a sense of how it sounds?
I don't mind reading some of it.
Okay, Oliver, do you just want to read? Yeah, just read the the first the title and first stanza so we can see how it sounds.
Sure. Vattenbottnar. Här är lysande grönt. Ljuset droppar flader, spekling, springor av strålljus och lättnad mellan oroliga lövverk. Här är ljusa pärlor som klippat fast vid den tunna grenen. Grenen har en skorpa. Innanför rinna lymfan sakta och sutt. Det är farligt. Skallytan är kanske tunnare än läpplarvens genomlysta silkeshud. Det andas ur ett litet håll en varelse av glasljus utan jordisk form. Det lyser fram genom en hinna av salivsekret. Här hänger också ormen röd över grenen. Han har nämligen människoögon och följer rådjurets rörelse med lugn blick. Men inom kort ska strålen störta ut ur grenen.
Thank you so much. Thank you for doing a cold reading.
Yeah, sorry, no problem.
Beautiful. So I'll read the English. Water bottoms. And again, I want you to think about like, what kind of world is this and how is it built? So a term from sci-fi is world building. Like, can we apply it to this world? Let's see. Water bottoms. It is glowing green here. The light drops, flutters, reflections, slits of light and lightness in the trembling foliage. Here, glowing pearls stick to the thin branch. There's a scab on the branch. Inside it, the lymph runs slow and sweet. It is dangerous. The shell's surface is perhaps thinner than the lip larvae's glowed through silk skin. It breathes through a small hole, a creature of glass slide with no earthly form. It glows through a membrane of saliva secretions. That's hard to read. Here, the snake also hangs red over the branch. He has human eyes and follows the deer's movement with a calm gaze. But soon, the ray will burst out of the branch. Soon the ray will burst out of the branch. Soon the membrane, the poison will erupt. Soon the eye juices will run across the wooden face while the grass is ground into seed flour in the deer jaws. The sweet stalk will bend backwards towards the pane. And here a feather moves toward the river surface as she who loves water sinks back through the bottoms of the light. Okay, what can we say about this world and what can we say about how it's built? Yeah, what do you think, Vitor? Oh, sorry, Emma and Vitor both. Yeah, Vitor first.
It's very interesting to read this because English is not my first language. I'm Brazilian, Portuguese is my first language. So I had to read a translation of other language in my second language. It's very interesting. And what I noted before reading this work, especially now with pair readings of the Swedish version and the English, is the movement of the sound and the images of the poem. So we don't have this movement of, let's say, some sci-fi that what dictates the movement of the story is the narrative, but we have the movement of images and the movement of the sounds of the repetitions and the consonants. I don't remember the word in English, but especially the strong words, the strong sound of the words, and it's, to me, sounds a lot like Necropastoral, because when you are describing it, I remember vividly of the seminar by Michael Marder here at the New Center on the myth of the Phoenix, and how about the movements of that are put away in our image of nature. And it struck me how your description of the Necropastoral is filled with movement everywhere. So there's kind of movement in the poem and in the translation of this, because you have to not only translate the words, but translate the movements of those words, the spaces, and everything else. So this stuck with me in the poem itself and the translation.
Okay, so I love what you have to say, because I haven't read this aloud in a while, and it is tough. Oliver, good work, because it's not doing what English sentences are supposed to do. The punctuation doesn't seem there to be there to explain how the first part of the sentence affects the second part of the sentence, which is what English sentences usually do, right? The punctuation seems to be there to provide contact or to provide a pause or an unexpected break so that you sort of stumble. It's not doing the kind of regulation that English readers expect. And so I think that the translator is trying to get at the sense of a world like in motion, where things are in contact and changing and contaminating what's next to it. And yeah, the Dickinsonian hyphen that's there to kind of like matrix. Somebody said the matrix earlier, I saw it pop out. There's like a matrix effect in the punctuation here, which kind of bends and turns time instead of doing the work it's supposed to do of keeping everyone orderly and explain, neatly separating before from after. Here, there's this sense that things that are in contact can affect each other and infect each other. And then this word soon just takes over the poem, right? In the whole second half, soon, 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 soon. So it's like we have this pile up of this affect of soonness. Okay, Emma?
Hi. Yeah, I was going to say something similar about the movement, and also just that all of these poems are, I mean, they're usually in present tense. Like it's present tense and repetition, which I think is interesting and definitely goes along with this necropastoral aesthetic, where the perspective for me seems to always be on the inside of something. It's like on the inside of some process taking place. So I think like that repetition of like soon, soon, and now, and here happens constantly in most of the poems. And I think it definitely creates some kind of a strange process when you're reading it. Like you feel yourself going inside of the middle of a process, it seems. Like even a lot of the poems start like, and here we are, or this is, you know, so it's very active. The language is very active, I feel, even with these like hiccups and periods and jolts. It's like a very disjointed, process taking place.
I love that idea. I'll also add that there's this idea that like these temporal and narrative tags that are there to explain in normal conventional texts here just seem to intensify things for like just emotion, like affective reasons. Like it is glowing green here instead of just being neutral. It's sort of like this like instigatory phrase that like kind of instigates, intensifies what's going to happen here, soon, as opposed to just giving us information about temporality or something. It's like signaling that something is intense and getting more intense and getting more intense, right? Another very obvious topic to say, so suspense, I see that word popping up. Another like obvious thing to say about Germanic languages and Scandinavian languages here is they make compound words. That compound words like are like this particular poet intensifies that element of Swedish to create compound words that either aren't compound words or to break apart compound words that might be more familiarly might be more neutral in Swedish and not like seem like compound or collapsed. And it's her practice in Swedish to like stress those words so that they almost their kind of invisible compoundness kind of breaks apart. So some of these words here in the middle of the first stanza, that's so hard to read. These are not normal Swedish compounds. Swedish uses compounds, but this is almost like taking that attribute of Swedish and going wild with it. So like about, so 1, 2, 3, 4 lines down, it is dangerous, : it is dangerous. The shell's surface is perhaps thinner than the lip larvae's glowed through silk skin. So lip larvae here is not a word. You can look across and see it in the Swedish läpplarvens. And then I don't know about, I really don't think genomlista is, and I'm sorry if I'm saying that genomlista is a real word either person, right? So is it Oliver? Glowed through?
It is a genomlista is actually like a lighting through, but you can say that like the light that goes through a material. But there are several others, like even just in the vattenbottnar, water bottoms in the title, and where like strål use this like shimmering light that's also like those two words are contracted together into strål use, like shimmering and light. And there are lots of them that aren't translated also that are there in the original.
So thank you for correcting my error, but in some ways it like kind of comes a little closer to what I actually wanted to say, which is kind of a denaturalizing of the language. Like the compounds is something Swedish does. So she both does it, she creates lawless versions that then make the more familiar ones suddenly seem a little stranger again. And so there's like a kind of seizing upon a facet of the language and then amplifying it or intensifying it here, which we would call a kind of denaturalizing of the language. And all in the service of kind of creating this new, I would say, necropastoral, in the sense that like a lot of Swedish poetry, like a lot of European poetry, is kind of renewed in the Romantic period and the cult of nature. So the idea that we're going to go to these idyllic spots, but then stage these kind of uncanny, verminous, mutated life forms and settings there is itself a kind of necropastoral idea, like a kind of seizing on and infecting of what formerly might have seemed ideal and like kind of releasing like almost rodentia through it. So that's very clear in these two poems. These poems were kind of fun to read, and I think. And one thing that I haven't mentioned is, and again, I'm thinking back to A.V. Maritini's like circuitry, is that Osabai is also a fan of movies, especially horror movies and other kind of schlocky movies. So to some degree, I feel like she has wired the idea of nature poetry to the kind of vocabulary or moods of like B movies or more schlocky, kitschy, like the movies that aren't usually considered art films, although nowadays, obviously those categories are kind of coming apart. So this is a pair of poems. And even the fact that it's a pair of poems and one feels like the sequel to each other is usually something that you don't see in high art films, right? It's usually something that you see in like schlocky films or commercial films where you'll have a sequel, this franchise, right? So here I feel like we have a guinea pig cave franchise. So just for fun, can we read these two poems? Will somebody read In the Guinea Pig Cave?
Joyelle?
Yeah.
So my partner is Swedish, so he can read it. And
Are
actually,
you in the mood? Will you do it for us? Will you read us? Will you read us? Can you read it? There's a shadow on the page. Can you read
Yes,
it?
yes. No, hello, by the way. I'm Carl.
Okay. If you would read it to us, we'd be delighted. And then give us your thoughts. Here, join the
Yes,
seminar.
yes.
Okay,
Sure.
go for it.
Okej. Där låg marsvinen. Där låg marsvinen och väntade med blod om munnen som min syster. Där låg marsvinen och luktade illa i grottan. Där låg min syster och svällde och värkte och bultade. Där låg marsvinen och hade... What? Och hade hon överallt med benen rakt upp som skalbaggar och såg depraverad ut och var blå under ögonen som av månaders fördärv. Min syster kräkte stillsamt och likgiltigt. Det rann sakta ut, ur hennes slöa mun utan att hon rörde en enda nerv. Och grottan var spenvarm och full av höstlöv och under jorden låg armen från en skyltdocka. Där låg marsvinen och hade ont och var av deg. Där låg marsvinen bredvid knivarna som skulle skiva dem som limpor. Och min syster med läppar av blåbär, mull och gröt. Långt ute tjöt sirenen omänskligt. Det var där marsvinen låg och väntade med blod om mun och snedvridna kroppar. Det väntade. Och jag var trött i hela magen av degfärs och marsvinslimpa och visste att det skulle hämnas på mig. Okay, that's it. It was difficult to see.
All right. So what do you have to tell us about this wild poem?
I mean, I think I haven't had a chance to read the translation yet. So I'll but of course it's I mean it's incredibly violent in this gooey way. And there are different kinds of violence. There's a sharp violence, but then there's also kind of gooey violence flowing into the ground. And this is it.
Is there a violence also towards the Swedish language of sorts?
I mean, not grammatically. I mean, of course, the words are unexpected in the context a little bit, but I would say that it's not difficult to read per se.
Oh. Okay.
But we have this guinea pig, which is the total wrong organism, right?
Yes,
So
yes, of course. I mean, so kind of semantically, it's a bit weird, of course. The words are unexpected, but sort of it's comprehensible to read it. You get the image.
Well, I love your first comment about gooey and violence, which are two things that, of course, gore is gooey, but here she's leaned into the gooey side of gore, right? Because we have our guinea pigs and dough and mush. My sister with lips of blueberry and soil and mush. There's this like kind of childlikeness to what they're eating and what they're being compared to. So it's as if you can make a Venn diagram of goo and gore. And then somehow we've kind of gone into the childlike version of goo and away from the gore, even though the setting is violent and the actions are violent. So we know it's violence, but then every time we expect, gore, the wrong kind of food or the wrong kind of body. Yeah. But we still have this kind of like rhetoric of suspense, right? This is happening. They waited. And at the end, I was tired of my whole stomach from the meat dough and the guinea pig loaf. And I knew they would take their revenge on me. It's kind of like genre tag of like suspense and revenge, but with all the players are ill cast in this. But I also like the first thing you said, like the goo is kind of going into the ground. So as with the Maritini, or as with the idea of the pastoral, the borders become circuits and they become loaded with like matter or energy or genre or affect or language. enters the circuit and enters and starts circuiting through and making new bio. And then this is the sequel, which I will just read the ending of because it's fun. But here we have whole generations of guinea pigs. Here they come and get us. We're almost at the bottom. Here they come and get us. Now they're opening us up, and now they're swallowing us with their pink flesh organs. And now I love you, and now I fear you, and now I finally roll out your guinea pig body on the baking sheet, and you lean back and let your skin grow into the stinking cell plasma of the guinea pig wall, my beautiful traitor. And the guinea pigs swarm all the way into the depths of your treacherous guinea pig organism. So, I mean, here we have a staging of like a classic horror setup. The final girl, right, uses the word final in here. And now finally I roll your guinea pig body onto the baking sheet. And all this like confusion of intimacy and eroticism and vengeance is all being played out with all the violence you might expect, but with the ridiculous guinea pig bodies somehow interfering or somehow gumming up the works and making it gooier, even gooier than it should be. Well, why do this? Like, why should we like feed the wrong material into our horror machine? I don't have the answer. But what happens when we feed the wrong material into the horror machine? The genre machine of horror, we feed the wrong material into it. Do we still get horror? Like, what else are we getting here? Emma, is your hand raised? I'm sorry.
Oh,
It was not raised, but I was thinking of something. It was accidentally raised. Yeah. Well, I was thinking about what you were saying earlier about the idea of the necropastoral building connections between things that wouldn't necessarily be linked or we wouldn't think to link together. And I'm thinking about, I'm kind of thinking about romanticism and how there's like there's this connection with romanticism to like nationalism and sort of like this idea of purity. And I think like there's something about butting these opposites up together like this, blending things into one another, that's sort of like against this idea of pure. Like, what is pure? It's there is no purity. There's only blending, and there's only yeah, I don't know, decaying into things. I don't know.
I love what you're saying, and I'm really thinking about it, and I want to combine it with Georgiana's partner's comment about the goo running into the ground, because on the one hand, we have these sentences, which she said, you know, the sentences are readable, legible. The grammar is legible. And what they contain is unexpected and kind of floods the ability of syntax to protect it, you know? And so we end up with this. So to break aside, these are prose poems, right? They're written in prose, but they're poems because they mobilize the elements of lyric. But most of the time, so for the next slide, we'll look at this in a minute, you know, that's how we expect to see our free verse in people who write free verse. Like, we expected to see it in these like very verticalized stanzas. Here, we're kind of forced into these like mushy caves of language, and yet we feel something, or at least I feel something draining and pushing me down to the last line, you know? And then for myself, I feel gorged and I feel like invited to reread it and like almost regurgitate it. And I think that's an unusual circuiting of prose, although not every prose poem works that way. Some feel very distilled and dreamlike. I mean, in the world of prose poetry, some feel like letters. You know, there's lots of things, some imitate a photograph. There's lots of things prose poetry can be. This one feels like intestinal or gorgy or something like that. I feel moved down it and like kind of pressed out the bottom, or draining, if we want to use hydraulics rather than the intestines, you know, pushed through. And then I like come up and I read it again and I'm like pushed through a thicker space than a lyric poem usually presents. Okay, so now are those hands at the top? Michelle and Rebecca and Levi? Yeah. Michelle.
Yeah, so I think this is really interesting because I know I lived in 7 different countries, but I was raised on an Air Force base in Japan, and I know that like movies in other countries are not as genre based as they are in America. For example, like there's not like I've seen South Korean films that were like extremely funny, extremely terrifying, and extremely romantic all in 2 hours. You know what I mean? And like we tend to like siphon in Hollywood our emotions into different 2 hour chunks. Like you're supposed to be scared here, you're supposed to be laughing here, you're supposed to be rom-com here. And just like the idea of Georgiana's partner saying like there's a gooey form of horror, like that never really like that does like it seems so comedic to me to be gooey, and that's just my American self, like, you know, speaking to a text that's like international. And I was just wondering about that. I also think that it's really interesting because like you were talking a little bit before about science and how we use science with literature and language and interdisciplinary stuff, and I recently found out that about 10 years ago, like the scientists proved that violence is contagious and moves like a virus. And like it moves like a social behavioral virus, and it can be de-escalated along the same lines as AIDS activists de-escalate pandemics along those lines. And I just think that it's super interesting, like this gooey like the guinea pig, the spilling over into like all types of behavioral health. But yeah.
Yeah, that's really fascinating what you're saying. And also like on a larger, everything you have to say is so fascinating. And I should say that Osa herself has a practice of using scientific terminologies and tones, maybe not so much in these poems, although there is a lot of conversation. If you read the whole book, there's like proboscises and a very like kind of scientific way of describing bodies, and obviously organisms. Even down in the middle of this, you see something like the amniotic fluid surges in the pumping pulsum chasm. Like sometimes there's like a collapsing of mammalian and insectoid like descriptives. So there's also like a scientific strata to the writing, which I think is really interesting. And then like forcing like unexpected affects through that like tissue of scientism to see what comes out the other side. And like horror movies have their absurd element, right? Like laughter, it can also be that response, especially when you watch it in a large group. So I think that has something to say with a lot of the things you've isolated. So Rebecca and then Levy. Rebecca?
Yeah, I want to go back to the question about why put the wrong material in, right? That there's a thing that starts to happen, and I think it's one of the reasons I'm really attracted to this mode of thinking, where the boundaries of the mental constructs that we have, right? Like when we say guinea pig, that conjures a particular structure, right? A particular set of aesthetics, right? That arrive in the mind. And, you know, horror speaks to cultural anxieties. And in this case, the anxiety is this blurring of the lines between what we expect and what we don't expect. And so that we can kind of end up seeing the guinea pig or this thing that has its own particular aesthetics disassembled, those aesthetics disassembled, to see it more of what it actually is, or see it in this completely different context. Am I making sense? Sometimes when I'm talking in these things, I feel like I'm talking into a void. But that, you know, everything is fundamentally at the most like cellular level. Like how does it change at the cellular level when we break everything apart?
Definitely agree. And also you're making me think of that guinea pigs have like a triple referent or maybe a quadruple referent. You know, their food.
Yeah.
In Latin American culture, they're pets. In North American culture, they are formerly, and we still use it as a metaphor, a dead metaphor for scientific, like you're the guinea pig for this particular like drug or experiment, you know, something I'm experimenting on, the guinea pig. And they have reason to have revenge on us in that regard. And then now we know that these small like rodential creatures, I don't even know if they're technically rodents, so we can look that up at the break, when eaten, can transfer prion diseases and things like that, right? So they're also like vectors, and we're vectors to them. So like the more you press on these guinea pigs, the more like descriptive of all kinds of metabolisms they seem to be, and the richer they are as vectors. Okay, Levy? I don't know if you say your name that way or Levi, sorry.
Yeah, Levy.
Okay.
Thank you. I think what is also fascinating about these poems are how it externalizes something that is supposed to be inside or something that is supposed to be hidden, which is also, I think, the same aesthetic of body horror, of how it plays on disgust, and in this case, the innards are somehow externalized to the extreme. Somehow they're like landscapes. So I think that is what connects it to the pastoral thing, as if these innards or these pulsing chasms are turned into like a prayer or something, like something very uh very vast, and something that is almost like a landscape. That is how it struck me.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah, to create like a topography or even a planetariness, right?
Yeah.
For something that is so small and derogated, the guts of the guinea pig organism, you know, is important enough to control the weather of this entire planet of this book. So I love that idea. Okay, Arnab?
I was thinking about in the heart of the guinea pig darkness. It reminded me of uh, uh, Joseph Conrad's novella Heart of Darkness, and the violence that the primal violence that it depicts, like towards the end, where the limbs, the black limbs, were the source of the river were like black limbs, and it has some parallels with the breaching of borders, and also the immense violence that is perpetrated. So that's what I was thinking about, its association with Conrad's novella.
Yeah, I think that to bring in a more serious level there, and maybe it's being parodized, or maybe it's just being harnessed here, is the idea that to humans, anything verminous, whether it is an actual vermin or something that we are like racistly applying, xenophobically applying to another group, is that threat of extermination, right? So I think like that, yeah, to isolate that, even if it's being handled somewhat parodically by the switching of the nouns around, I think it is at least being like conjured. That specter is being conjured here. Okay, so Georgiana, last word on this goes to you.
I just want to say a couple of words about maybe the Swedish word for guinea pig, also, if it's interesting. Marsvin, which has quite a lot of, despite the cuteness of the animal, it has quite a lot of kind of linguistic violence kind of built inside of it also. I mean, as in German, the word means basically etymologically a pig of the sea. So there's this kind of expansiveness, and in the word too, where it sort of opens up to the ocean, perhaps. But then also the mar, which is the first part of the word, of course, is it's the same. It's an alliteration with the Swedish word for nightmare, which is mardröm. Which it's kind of easy to read this connotation into the text. And svin, the second part of the word, is it's quite a strong word for a pig. That's it's not the normal word. Well, it is quite common, but it's quite you would use it as an insult often. Maybe interesting to have that also.
Thank you, because that goes to Arnav's point. And also circle like that there is something stronger here beneath the kind of ridiculous absurdity and cuteness. There's like a stronger kind of threat here. And I also would just say, like, again, just to go back to my initial point about neologism, like that her use, that she like intensifies the compound energy of Sweden, like Swedish's ability to make compound words, like most Germanic languages is like intensified here, but also has the unexpected effect of like splitting those words, like letting you hear those other words rumbling in the familiar compounds, if that makes sense. Yeah. Okay, great. So I'm going to read just one more poem to you, and then we'll take a break and we'll reconvene to speak about the other poem, and it's neologism, neologistic mechanisms of the angel green sacrament. And then we'll close class with a small writing exercise that you can complete at home. So I just wanted to go back to I can't remember now if it was Emma talking about how it seems like there's like systems within systems, and a lot of people have spoken about the small scale that then moves outside. So when you're reading this book, you read like 30 of those, well, yeah, 15 to 20 of those prose poems, and then you hit this, which is like one of the only poems in the book that's lineated as verse, that's in free verse. And it is shocking. Like if you had read all these poems in order and then hit this, like you almost feel like your own stomach kind of drop out of you for a minute, because it's like you're falling. You've been in this like kind of cave weird thing, and suddenly you're going straight down. And yet when you read it, what's actually being reported is a lot of the stuff that you guys have isolated as happening in the other poems, but now suddenly it's vertical and it's sheer. And it just shows you how much you have like been led to like kind of assume about this world you're moving through by meeting it in prose. And now suddenly you're falling. Mass. Now I move into the river. Now the river moves through me. Now I move into the pearl. The red drop falls out of me. Now I move into the kiss, the thick, dark muscle. Now the muscle touches the mass. Now a star of coal sinks through me. Now I move into the oil. Now there is movement in the oil. Now there is explosion in the muscle. Now the star throbs. Now I move through the pearl. Now the tar runs out of me. Now I fall into the tar. Now I sink into the magma. Now the darkness aches. Now I sink into the dark through myself. Amazing, right? So all these mechanisms and all their redolence that we've been discussing are suddenly like that, right? Vertical. Everything's falling and catching and falling and catching, like a real nightmare. Yeah. On that note, let's take a we started a little bit late, so but I think we're still doing fine. So let's take a 10-minute break, stretch your legs, flip through the Angel Green PDF. We'll talk a little bit about its mechanisms, and then we'll apply some. Okay, so 10 minutes. So let's see, I'm ready to begin again. I'm afraid maybe some of the new center staff can let me know when you feel like most people are back. I guess I should have, it's hard for me to say.
People haven't left, so we will just. Hi, folks. Is everyone back?
I'm not, I mean, just as soon as everyone's back, I'm ready. No rush, but I'm ready when they're ready.
Okay.
Sorry, what was the name of, she's gone.
No, I'm here. I'm here.
What's the name of the artist that made this thing of
sorry.
Eva heads?
Can you hear me?
What's the name of the artist?
I love what you're doing with action books. Can you talk about that at the end of the class, if that's okay?
Yes, for sure.
Because
But
I
who-
love, I just got notified, I just subscribed to the email and I was like, I just want to know more. But yeah.
Absolutely. I absolutely will. But I want to answer this question that you were starting to ask. Was it about the artist of the strawberry piece?
Yes.
Yes, Maratini. So I can write it in the chat again. And she was working on, it's a, you can find her on Twitter if you're on Twitter.
Okay. Thank you.
And her book is called We the Parasites.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
But I'd be happy to talk
Yeah.
about action books as well. And even before, here, we'll go back a page because it is relevant. So this picture actually has something to tell us too about both action books and the Necropastoral. So this is a work called, this is a work that is a collaboration between a painter called Harold Cohen and one of the earliest AI models, which was called Aaron. So Harold Cohen is a trained British painter, and this work, let's see if it's dated. He, let's see. Well, I don't have the year on this work, but in the 70s and 80s, maybe even the late 60s, he was one of the first people to really try to develop a model of AI to make art. And his notion was not to do what we would do now, which would be to program, you know, like the large language model or that model of teaching AI by giving it like 1,000 examples until it learns that way. He actually tried to like teach Aaron art by teaching like the way in the order that we would teach a human student, like the principles of art. And they had a lifelong collaboration. And sorry, get rid of that. There was just a retrospective at the Whitney Museum of New York. So if you Google the Whitney website, you can get information about Harold and Aaron's collaboration and look at their work. And part of the reason I bring this up, two reasons. One is, so Harold Cohen named this program Aaron because he intended to improve his model and continually make new models. So he would have Aaron and Benjamin and Christopher and like give each of them the name of a human child. But he and Aaron worked so successfully together that it was just Aaron for the rest of his life. And now Harold Cohen very recently died and Aaron is still alive. So if you go to the Whitney Museum, if you saw the exhibit, they would have the name cards on the side on the gallery that would give Harold Cohen and his birth and death date, and then Aaron and his birth date, the date of his inception, and like hyphen, as if Aaron continues. Aaron is eternal. They rebuilt the technology and the programming, and they have him making art in the gallery. So wonderful and wild things to say there. And this forms the cover art for the book we're going to read next week, Wildgrass on the Riverbank, because Harold Cohen's partner in life was the Japanese poet Hiromi Ito, who became interested in American poetics, left her first husband in Japan. She already had a career as a poet and came to live in California. We'll talk about all that next week. Why do I bring all this up? Because Action Books is a press that I started with my husband, the translator Johannes Jansson, whose work we're about to look at again. So he's in the room with us as well. And we did it specifically actually to publish Osabai, because some of those poems from With Deer, he had been very successful publishing them in literary magazines and things like this. But when it came to put a book together, we could not find a publisher that was interested in like a contemporary, not American, not Nobel Prize famous writer, but someone who was just doing contemporary, innovative, experimental, feminist, surrealist work and avant-garde work, like living avant-garde work. There just wasn't at the time like a press venue for that kind of work. And so we started the small press Action Books with just 3 titles, this book by Osabai and 2 US titles in 2004. So this is actually our 20th anniversary as a press, just 3 titles. And to go back to Katrina, our original proofs actually got lost after Katrina, when a lot of like the shipping and everything just obviously seized up in the aftermath of Katrina. So we are a storm-born and a catastrophe-born press. And our aesthetic has always been poetry that goes too far, as we say, as opposed to poetry that is, necessarily connected to the mainstreams of the culture it comes out of. Like we concentrated on these avant-garde poets who have since become like very well known. And we publish stuff from lots of cultures, and we forward translators and translation. And the result of this has been to push my own aesthetics. Like, I don't think I would have built a model like the Necropastoral that is so like planetary and cosmic, but also so tiny and minor at the same time, if I hadn't had the examples of poets like Kim Il-sung, who we're going to read, or Hiromi Ito or Osa, people who do such audacious thing with scale. And also, I think being immersed in translated works, though I'm not a translator, has just pushed me so far out of like an American model, or an Anglo-American model of monolingualism. So we didn't publish Dark Matter. So Dark Matter was published by Ugly Duckling Press, which at the time was one of the like really valiant, awesome translations, one of the few. It's still alive and is just as valiant and awesome, but we were kind of like lone soldiers for a while. They published Dark Matter, and this book With Deer is from Black Ocean. So we came up with a lot of these tiny presses, and we kind of seeded translation through them. And now I think a lot of the exciting translation energy, what there is of it in the US, is definitely coming from the small presses. And we've pushed these poets right as far as we can, because for a lot of poets, having an English translation means you can then, go to the Berlin Book Fair and find a press that wants to sponsor like another translation, like into German or into French or wherever it may be. So having an English translation also serves that poet to have their work move through the world as a kind of matter of temperate, not as a bridge translation, but like as a kind of like something that the publishers can read and then commission a translation. So it's been our goal to like push these translators and these poets like forward into visibility. And some of them have moved on to bigger presses that have more ability to do publicity and have won like the global poetry prizes, like the Griffin Prize or MacArthur Genius Grants or stuff. So that's an interesting story. But being immersed in translation has just like totally destabilized any kind of like the Anglo-American models that were given to me just didn't describe my experience of art, including the notion, and we can come back to this, that like the dead press into the present with their songs and their sonority, which is something that when we get to Kim Il-sung's Phantom Pain Wings, I think we'll really find, or that the category like a posthumousity has a political force. I think that has been kind of eroded out of the way, despite the fact that like in some ways contemporary poetry or modern poetry begins with Poe, it's been kind of edited out of how Americans think about poetry's work, or what can be political. And I think like once an American has that, all that falls away when you're just flooded with contemporary models that like in which the dead unite history and the present and futurities and political constellations, that American poetry with its like very hierarchical prize driven model like just doesn't let in if it can help it. Does that make sense? So I can loop back to that. So I would think one of the reasons I'm so comfortable assigning translated work and eager to learn from folks who speak the primary language and eager to learn about its impressions on folks who speak neither the primary nor the second language is like, I just feel my model of poetry is so much wilder, bigger, and more vibrant because of my contact with translation. So on that note, and so I'm sitting here in the Necropastoral, this actually is what I picture, and this is a work I wouldn't have known about if I hadn't been involved in publishing Japanese translation, which in turn introduced me to work created in California and seems very California, made by an English guy, and one of the first AI art making programs, Aaron. So everything is looped. Okay, what I would like to do next is speak a little bit about the angel green. You know, because we spoke at such length about Osabai, which is fine, because I thought it was great to set the terms of our conversation. We may not spend as long on this today, but we can come back to it. But one of the meta lessons of today's lesson, which we're going to get to when we do our writing exercise, which I want to leave plenty of time for, is the power of neologism, both as like an aesthetic engine, as an engine of aesthetics and criticism, and you know, eventually as a political engine as well, that it has energy in it, that is a kind of inception in neologism. And part of that is because the two halves of the neologism both do and do not belong together. And that push me, pull you effect feels very cosmic to me, even though it's like just one word and a smallest possible system, but has all the cosmic force to me in its likeness and unlikeness. So here we have the angel green sacrament. Before we get into discussing it, I guess I would just say, I would like to share these two paragraphs from an interview with the poet. The poet's name is Eva Christina Olsen, and it's about this encounter with the angel. And I'm just going to read these two paragraphs for you. You can find this interview by Googling it. Or maybe I can just put the link in the Google Classroom. What led you to write about an angel in the Angel Green Sacraments? This is Johannes, the translator, is interviewing the poet. I've always wondered about these sheer creatures with their wings on their slender bodies. Where do they come from? How do they survive the winter? So he's asked her about angels, but she immediately makes it strange by putting it in a human climate, like a human planetary concern that you wouldn't think an angel would have, right? Where do they come from? How do they survive the winter? I rarely see them in summer. Sometimes it happens. Then with a more intense green body and with more clearly drawn wings. Like, is she even describing angels anymore? It is more towards autumn and early winter that I see them fluttering around the lamp or slowly moving by the window or over the wall. An early winter, one came and sat on my hand. It was my company for several days, and I called it angels. I call them angels. Some say maidens, Jungfrau. There is such a sheen and tenderness around them, and they radiate this almost invisible soul and their almost invisible body, which towards the winter becomes drier and drier to eventually disappear or lie down to die. It is the ultimate living thing for me to talk to, a figure that expands what we might associate with the living, someone I can identify with and who takes me out into the spaces from where I sit on the chair in the kitchen with the darkness outside the window. So, thank you for the link. So one of the things that really interests me about the first paragraph is how quickly she turns from the angels become earthly and then maybe entomological, and then flip again and connect her beyond the earthly to that darkness, right? And then the next paragraph. There are different inspirations for angel green. The angel is one of them. Another is a long pistachio green prom dress I wore when I was 16 or 17 years old. Another touchstone is an unusually vivid and clear dream I had several years ago, a densely populated city and a small door, and inside it, 12 steps up to a ledge with niches on each side, but I would leave the text on the ledge. And then there are deep childhood memories that are intertwined, including a puppet show that I have strong memories of, and I can mention the movies Whispers and Shots, which came out when I was 12 or 13 years old. So what I'm interested in the second paragraph is this kind of joining together of things that do not belong together by category, right? Like, so we have the kind of insect angel or psyche, I think we saw in the first paragraph, which is feminized. She feminizes it. Then we have this dress, again, feminized, but it's the long pistachio green prom dress, like so specific. And the colored leaps from the, like, seems to be forming a circuit here. And then this dream setting that she uses, I think, to like dramatically structure the piece. Does that make sense to you? So these are something that I think you can turn over, but the idea is that like there's a kind of a neologistic, a splitting and joining energy, and then the green pulse kind of pulses through the whole description to produce the poem. So now we have our poem. Let's see if this link actually works. I kind of doubt it. My links aren't seemingly working today. Is it going to work? Going to open up. Let me see if I can figure out a way to open this up. So without having it in front of us then, since it seems like the program is stripping away my links. I'm trying to think about how to solve this more quickly. Let's see. Give me a second to see if I can open it up. I'll stop share for a second. And I'll try again. Hold on. This time I'll see if it'll let me. I have it open, but I can't figure out a way to share it. Okay, hold on. Just, sorry. This was, doesn't seem to be doing what I want it to do, guys. Hold on a second. Is it here? Oh, it's here. Okay, so screens, open up. Let me see if I can do it, guys. Thanks for your patience. This is kind of embarrassing. Ah, there we go. Okay. It's not very pretty, but we'll see if we can make it work. Can you still hear me and see this? Yeah. Okay, this is the document I sent you, and this is the Angel Green Testament. Let's see if it loads. Girl, is it not my day? Does it not want to load the text? Ah, here we go. Okay, it's loading it from the bottom. Okay, not ideal. Close your eyes. We're reading this backwards. Come on, man. Don't love this. Don't look. We'll get nauseous. Okay, so this was not the best way for me to share this with you in a sense, but in some ways I love the digital way of reading this because I do not mean for us to be going up and down it this way. Sorry, terrible. Close your eyes. I'll tell you when to open them again. Technical difficulties. Okay, so here we are. We're in the Angel Green sacrament here. I'll just start reading it from the very beginning. Let's just read the first page so we can get focused. The illuminated cranium, which glows green and without light, would never melt into my wing, lies on the first step of the stairs, your sacrament, the midsummer solstice pistachio green angel, pistachio green body, born wings of no one more than no one are, so light, disappear in light, never die, are never born, are light, nothing other than light, are so light, disappear in light, die always, and burn always, are light, live on nothing, are born from nothing, live on nothing, die of nothing. So in a way, it's a little bit shameful to have given you this text when the original book is so beautiful. So here's what it looks like in Swedish, which you, come on. Well, you can't see it maybe, but it is a beautiful, there we go. Okay, so it is this beautiful, really light green book, which has this almost chrysalis wing on the cover. And then the text itself is in green, just as it is in the English. But it has this extremely ethereal and even entomological feeling to it because it has this like transparent cover that it's wrapped so delicately in, you know? At the same time, though, I think that the light-born effect of reading this on a screen kind of works as well. So in the interest of just our theme of neologism today, to what extent did this strange word angel green stay with you as you read this book? To what extent does the neologism hover through the book, or is that the best verb for it?
It get me like evergreen. I love the English word like evergreen, like always green or something like always flourishing, always good, and everything's fine. So, but in the end of the page, we got like we died for nothing. We died from a lot of heavy imaginaries. So the very interesting contrast there.
Yeah. If I'm understanding what you're saying, that it's got a kind of supporting or sufflating quality where the green, like it's very a lambent and a light, like a levitating green maybe. And the design of the book kind of supports that, right? It's like pushing the poem up to the surface of the page, and the poem seems to hover, right? A little bit. So that even when we hit a line, like nothing other than light, are so light, disappear in light, die always, are born always. There's a sense of like a recycling, a possibility, maybe. I don't know, but maybe not. Maybe there is something more dire going on. After all, an encounter with an angel is like a frightening thing. It can be a very, it feels like, it's a crossing of cosmic categories, right? Can other people talk a little bit about like how they affectively responded to the green in this poem, or to the term, the angel green? Yeah, Anna.
Hi. I for some reason thought about this, like the angelic and the machinic, like this kind of green that well, well, I would say like the technological green, but at the same time mixed with this in the convergence with this like notion of nature, but in its decay. So yeah, that what it made me think of.
I love that. So like the decay, the machinic, if I'm understanding you correctly, like the machinic, like the system element, like something is being broken down and decaying. Is that right? Am I like nature as
Yeah, because like we're like encountering this like decadence of the machinic as well, like in the whole of this accelerationist dystopian world. So I was like thinking about this kind of green, like lights of dying machines, but at the same time of like them emerging again, and of ourselves as machines as well. So it's like this type of things. Thank you.
I love that idea. And another thing I would place with that is like this idea, we could call it bioluminescence. Like she marks this green as so earthly, like it's something that seems insect-like. It's the pistachio green prom dress. Like it has these like earthly sources, and yet when they intensify each other, they levitate and they speak to like this speaker in such intimacy that it's like we've lifted away from the category of earth. And machines can decay, but they don't subside. Like those pieces stay in the system and can be recombined maybe in the way that the language is, perhaps. Just a thought, speculating. Rodolfo, what do you think?
Yes, I was thinking on this supposed vision that William Blake had when he was a kid. Like he saw a tree full of angels.
Right.
And then, so I was thinking on that, but also, I mean, how do we see, or how do we mix this with this mysterious hallucination or vision? I don't know. It's what happened there. In his prophetic biography or something, but that's the kind of thing that somehow relates the natural and the not the natural, the green with the with the, how do you say it, bondad, wellness of nature, the yes, the positive, I don't know how to say it in English, I'm so sorry, the yes, the bondad, the to be good, the goodness, not godness, goodness of nature that we associate with green. And then how the author starts like with this idea of the greenish of the angel. Maybe it's also related to the mysticism of Saint Hildegard, that kind of thing. Yeah, the lawfulness. And then but then talks about the glow of a skull. I mean, it's like what you said in the beginning, on the idea of fill a system with another thing, with another kind of another kind of element that it's not part of the system, of the poetic system.
I love your ideas. First, if I'm understanding them, like the beneficence, like the beneficence, the fertility of green, and the garden, the promise of the garden that was from Luciferase that I like referenced, but wasn't able to share with you guys. And on the other hand, you know, we have our own gardens that we know in the Christological method because of a fall, because of an acceptance of decay. We have gardens. So in that model, but then, and so like an angel is a cosmic intervention in human time. But it's also an intervention in clock time. It comes at night. It comes in the seasons. Like there's lots of ways of talking about time scales. And then we have bug time, which is something I've written about as well. Like those hyper generations of bugs. And it's almost impossible to talk about one insect. Even in her conversation, she talks about the angel and she immediately pluralizes them. In the interview with the poet, she immediately starts saying they, like it's a swarm that. And so in some ways it reverses what we saw in the guinea pig cave, perhaps, where like, but maybe it doesn't, but like this idea, the specter of annihilation, that in even in Paradise Lost type models, the angel has the sword of annihilation as well as the sword of life. We're not sure what this encounter is, but that we're always at the threshold of annihilation, and we always somehow survive it. The speaker always somehow goes to the next step, even when annihilation is presented. So. Okay, so maybe Andrew, we haven't heard from you yet.
So to get to a little bit of just the basic mechanics of how color works, right? Obviously, the way that color is received by the human body is by a reflection of certain spectrums of light off of a given material. So what we're dealing with here in this potential angel green is a color that firstly is bouncing off of a material that is not earthly, actually. It's something that is beyond any sort of periodic table of elements or anything that is heretofore discovered, an anomalous material, which produces a implication of a color spectrum that is beyond the ken of mortals, that there is a color spectrum exclusive only to God and the divine, which then brings up a discomfort of what is this material seemingly from the divine doing here, right? And there's a little bit of a clash, let's say, of materials in this. There's actually a passage that I pointed out just now. Angel green wings, the light dissolves the angel green dissolved wing. In light, that wings nothing. That wings angel green. Light, only in nothing. Angel, only in nothing. Wings in nothing. So this idea that we're dealing with a material that is seemingly so fragile that the mere presence of an earthly light can dissolve it utterly and completely, with implications that perhaps it has something to do with a more physical, spiritual connection to the cranium, to thought, so on and so forth. And yet it persists. It has an affect upon you. It leaves an impression upon you. It's not necessarily an answer, but rather a problem that leads to more questions.
No, I love it, and certainly like my familiarity is chiefly with, you know, again, like Western sort of Christological models of this, but angels often come along with revelation and prophecy in the Old and New Testament, and when they are described, their descriptions are so specific as to become unsensible. You know, like all the ideas that, you know, with all the wings and wheels within wheels, until suddenly like this thing that is supposed to be an organism that would be sensorily sensible to human apparatus becomes unsensible. Like you can't put the angel back together from the parts of the angel. Here we have something that is both like and unlike that, like the greenness and the intensity and the saturation coheres, even when the sentences and take apart, reassemble, take apart, reassemble. Yeah. And sometimes it seems like this poet is ventriloquizing an angel, sometimes relating speech. So I think that element of like, when can the human apprehend, when can it mimic, when can it be a vessel, and when can it not be a vessel? It's throbbing kind of through this. So thank you for bringing that up. It's so interesting. Georgiana, did you want to depend?
Yes. wanted to say that, like, as a first impression, when I heard angel green, I thought, or I would think, oh, maybe this is like a type of like precious stone, or yeah, it immediately has this like supernatural, maybe surrealist meaning attached to it. Like it invites some sort of the question, what kind of green? And then I felt like she goes through, like, is the pistachio green, is the fairy green, is the book cover, is, like there are tentative answers, and each of them conjure like this momentary jolt, and you go with it, and then you go to another register and so on. So yeah, I would say like it's very speculative type of green, and that also, just like angel, makes you believe that it doesn't exist in a way, or that if it exists, it's captured in small parts in all these scales and so on.
To join your point to Andrew's point, like what is sensible to what degree can you recreate the green? And like we know that I'm sitting in front of this like AI panoply of herbaceousness. So this computer program became like being taught the like steps of drawing, like from an Anglo like a Ruskin school like anatomical implants perspective. Became obsessed with these like pastoralia, or like, whatever this is, this herbaceous kind of mania that's happening here. And we know that like to reproduce those color tints digitally is often a matter of trademark or what have you. But to go back to Andrew's point and your point, so we reading in green, which we hardly ever do, at least in any Western literary culture that I know. And then we get this, where we're suddenly like our evolutionary eye spots or whatever, we can't read anymore, right? We just have this like oversaturation with ocular content, which I think in a PDF is even more strong, but it's odd and private feeling in the book, whereas I feel addressed differently by the screen, but that may differ for each of us. And then the text begins again. The room is spelled after your angel green staff. No, you say, I am not angel green. You are angel green. I say, it is that image that flies. We have this like, we're constantly at a threshold here. Yeah. Some kind of entomological, eschatological shaking threshold. Yeah, Pichaya?
Yeah, I just want to say that I really like the aesthetic aspect of the whole poem, not just only the written text, but the whole let's say form, the use of the color, and I'll be interested in seeing the book form, which from what I've seen when you showed, it's very light. It seems like the whole poem, the whole package per se, it's very well thought of, and the typography and the way that it's laid on the page, and I really enjoyed it as an experience. But I want to add on the idea from Andrew also too, in terms of the use of light and color. And also how that represent like the strange meeting concept in terms of the surreal and otherworldly encounters, or blurring boundaries between life and death, human and non-human, or even liminal spaces and states, in between spaces, just for the what Andrew was saying earlier, when he pointed out the very main elements in the poem, which are light and colors.
Okay, there's two more things I would like to do before I let you guys go. I hope I can keep you just 10 more minutes after our normal time, just because we start a bit late. So I want to be able to do two things for you that set us up for next week. And we can return to this if people wish to return to this one. So the two things that I would like to do right now, actually, Well, one of them I'm just realizing I'm probably not going to be able to do because of this difficulty I'm having with links. So that gives us more time. Okay. Does anyone have a, I hate to cut us off because it is so rich and kind of tremulous, this text, but does anyone have something else that they would like to put on the table before we move to our last activity to get ready for next week? Please feel that you can always return to works. Like these works are circuited together and in a way, I hate to leave this behind. It's almost painful to me to leave this one behind. But now I know that sonics aren't working on my links. I will try something different for next week. Okay, so we're going to step away from this one for a minute and go to our last activity. I'm going to go back to my slideshow. So just a second. Just a second. Please work.
If you're having difficulty, you can also share the link with me and I can share my screen.
No, I think this will work if you can just give me one moment.
Sure. Yeah.
We're going back to the PowerPoint if we can. Okay. So I'm going to give you for your homework now. I'm going to make a slight adjustment just because I wanted to play a little audio clip that I can't play right now. I'm going to give you three. In addition to reading the book, I'm going to give you 3 short audio clips to listen to, please, before class next week, because I want to talk about sonority and sonics and how they do or do not become immanent in text. So I was going to play a soundtrack for you now, but I'll just put it on the homework. Is that okay? And I'll make sure it's clear in the Google Classroom. So the last thing I want to do then is, okay, close your eyes for a second. We're getting there. We're getting there. I was going to play you her voice. Okay, what I would like to do now is begin a writing prompt, which I will give the rest of the instructions for so that you can complete it for homework. And we've covered so much ground today, but the thing that I want to give you as a tool is this idea of neologism. And so right now I would like to do a writing prompt that starts with neologism, if that's okay. And it will hop off angel green. So it's also a way of thinking about angel green and their marks about color that your classmates have made. So what we'll do is we'll start this prompt now. I'd like everybody to complete the prompt. And then folks who would like to can share their work, can finish this and share it as their presentation to start off next week's conversation. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. It's a writing prompt. So first I want you to pick a color, any color. We've covered green, but we haven't exhausted it. So you can do green or any color, and you can work in your first language. No need to work in English for now. You can translate it later or not, up to you. Any language you wish to write this in. So first, pick a color. Has everyone picked one? Got one? I'm going to assume everyone has one. Now I want you to create 5 neologistic versions of that color. So angel green, pistachio green, Vanta black. I'm sure since you guys are interested in it, you're aware that, you know, scientists have created a black that's blacker than black, and it's called Vanta black. So I want you to just use your ear to generate some new versions of that color. You might, like you could say, seahorse pearlescent. Maybe that's a color, I'm not too sure. But by putting words together, using the strategy of neologism, come up with 5 versions of that color. Have you got 5? Okay, next step. Select your favorite among the neologisms you have generated. So just whichever one is speaking to you. You can redo this at home. I'll make sure you have the prompts. You can start over at home, but for now, just go on your nerve. And now I just want you to free write for a little bit. So you've invented a color, right? Now I want you to free write a pair, and you've done it specifically by putting two words together, the color plus something else. Now I would just like you to free write a paragraph describing or defining this new color based on whatever associations you have on it. If you could also just have questions. Like you could say, what type of rain falls from a Vanta black cloud? And then answer your question. So if you need some help, ask yourself some questions and then enter it. But basically you're just free writing, just free associating all your associations with this color. Where is it found? What temperature is it? Do any organisms in nature have it? Do angels have it? I don't know. Do guinea pigs have it? I'm just going to give you 5 or 6 minutes to get started with this. You can return to it at home. Can God see this color? Can a bird see it? What bird? You can be as pataphysical as you like. Another minute to collect your thoughts, then I'll give you the next part of the prompt. Okay, stop that for now, but I do want you to go back to it and before we meet again. Step 5. Okay, think of an object that could be in some ways described by this new term you have generated. Now, by object, I don't necessarily mean just like an object. Could be a painting, a movie, a song, a dream you once had, a vision, anything that has an element of this color. Maybe you already generated that while you were free writing. You can also falsify this if you like. And now write a paragraph. So your first paragraph was that description you just wrote, or definition of that color that you just free wrote. You can rewrite that at home if you like. Your second paragraph, you have an object in mind now, and you start describing that object using this neologism you created. So what is an angel green wedding dress? What is a Vanta black bird? Where does it fly and how does it affect the air around it, etc. So you use the language or the definition you just generated to describe an object or an art object, a movie, a book, a poem, etc. If you created something blue, you may try to think of a blues song that has that element, or a lake or ocean, etc., and start describing it using the language you just generated. Maybe you have to invent this object. I'm not sure. You're free. Okay, I'll give you the final part of the prompt now, and then I'll put these all in a document and give it to Akanksha, who can put it in the Google Classroom so you can review it. Here's the final part of the prompt. Step 6. So now you have 2 paragraphs, right? You have the paragraph where you define the color. You had a neologism. You had a paragraph defining that color or describing it as best you could. Then you described an object using that definition you just generated. And now we're going to turn it back on the color. So having described your object in terms of your neologism, now write a new 1-paragraph description of your definition of your neologism. So now you're going to rewrite it in terms of your object. So paragraph 1 was the definition. Paragraph 2 described an object. Paragraph 3 is going to sort of synthesize the two. Turn that language that you started generating to describe the object back on your definition. So you're basically writing a new definition of the color, this time with reference to the object, and just see what grows there. So it's kind of like you had an idea, you applied it, and now you turned it back on the original idea to see what you've learned about it. Now, obviously, these are just prompts. You can change them to make sense for the way you think, and then just revise these 3 paragraphs into something you like, and we can share them next week, people who wish to share. Does that make it all sense to you? You can ask questions if it doesn't. So basically it's 3 paragraphs, the definition, the description of the object, and then sort of turning that description of the object back on, returning to the neologism now that you've spent some time with the object and reapproaching the neologism and describing it again, or defining it again, deepening it, changing it. So this is a 3-paragraph essay about your neologism. And it can be as wild and dreamlike as you like. So I'll make sure all of that's in the Google Classroom. Here's the homework, the total homework for next week. You're going to finish your 3-paragraph neologistic piece that you generated today. If you wrote about a real object, you can like be prepared to like share a picture of it or whatever it may be. If it's a dream object, you're free on that one. Only folks who want to present need to do that, and you can let the new center staff know if you want to present. But everybody should write this. To get into that neologistic, because a neologism is both like a model of the world and a way to describe the world, and something that's full of aesthetics and becomes saturated by the thing it describes. Like this word necropastoral has like expanded to like become a noun, an adjective, a way of thinking about literature, something I feel like I'm in right now with you folks. And so by asking you to do this somewhat trippy experiment with the neologism, I want to see how far you can force the model to describe the world and then the world to start infecting the model. So it's just a little baby version of that for today. So your first homework is to finish this 3-paragraph neologistic assignment, and you can start over. That's fine too. It's only 3 paragraphs. Your second part of homework is to read Wild Grouse on the Riverbank. And I want you to make notes for yourself in whatever format you like, clustered around 3 topics, because we'll talk about at least 3 things next time. So translation itself, how it's hosted in this book. This is a book with really awesome, in my point of view, it's got the poem, but it also has like really amazing introduction and afterword and glossary and all kinds of things. You can read these things in any order you like, but we want to think about how this kind of artifact of translation is itself functioning as a kind of ecosystem or biome. The second topic we can talk about is glossaries themselves, and like how we can think about what a glossary is, what an idiolect or a diction is. And then sonority, how texts host sound, which is like kind of like a agreed upon fallacy maybe of Western literacy that we can talk about it. I know not everybody here has their first like education in like the Western system, but we can talk about it from every angle, and we can also pull it apart and talk about why other models of how text can host sound. And to do that, we want to listen to 2 sonic pieces. And actually, I'm going to add the third one, which is 6 minutes long, that I was going to play today. So one is the song Out on the Weekend by Neil Young, which is a very famous song that you can just bring up on YouTube. And the other one is a piece called To Lie Down in Still Waters of Erasure by Carrie Watson. And this was actually inspired by a work I wrote. So it is part of my Necropastoral. I'll make sure that the New Center folks have all those links, and as well as a write-up of this homework and the prompts. So you can like do this at your leisure. Does that make sense to folks? And if anything is not making sense, you can change it into something that you like better, that makes sense for you. Okay. And that's today's lesson. So, or today's seminar, I guess. So is there anything else you want to say organizationally?
Yeah, I'm gonna add a link here, which I'm also gonna share by email, where folks can sign up for presentations each week. Right, so your writing prompts, everybody has to upload it. I'll also share a Google Drive folder where you can upload your responses to the writing prompt, and whoever wants to share it each week, you can volunteer and you put down your name in the sign up sheet. If you have any, I'll also share all of it by email by the end of the day today. And yeah, that's it. If you have any questions, I'm Akanksha, you can write to me. I will. Yeah.
And since I'm having some problems with these sonic links, I will get them all to you, and maybe you can post them for me, as well as a write-up of the book and the prompt in just normal Google Doc. Yeah.
Absolutely. I'll also I'll send out an email with the links to where they can share everything. In that same email, I can add
That
the
would be great. Yeah.
links.
Yeah. So just to recap then, so well next week I want to start the conversation with you guys on your neologisms and sort of stepping back and forth across the angel green. I wanted to recreate that threshold feeling of reading that poem where, you know, she steps into it and she encounters it, but then both she and the being she supposedly encounters begin changing and changing places. So I wanted to create this kind of 3-part prompt that might mimic that, but we'll find out what we discovered there. So that's the first thing we'll do. And then we'll use these sort of 3 loose groupings of translation, glossaries, and sonority to make our way through Wiregrass on the riverbank. And I guess another question I would have is, yeah, this category of posthumousity. You know, like what is the posthumous, and what is the dead being in this book? Okie doke. So thank you. This was an awesome conversation. My brain is swimming. Thank you very much for everybody's stamina and time today.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody. See you next week. This was fun.
Thank you.
Bye bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. And sorry for the technical difficulties, but now I know.
I have a quick question.
Yep.
Sorry, I always have questions.
No.
Do you guys take submissions for your action books? I don't translate, but I know a lot of like multilingual authors. So yeah.
I am not doing that. I'm not like wearing that hat right now. But let me give this some thought and get back to you.
Okay.
Of like what the best route might be. I'm working editorial, but